here in Southern California, also known as Community Alternatives to 911.
Hola, mi nombre es Kim, gracias por unirse. Estoy aquí con CAT 911, también conocido como Alternativas Comunitarias a la Policía o al 911.
And I'm turning on my video to encourage everyone else to do the same while you talk. A lot of the interpreters that we're working with today read lips or use your facial expressions and your lips as a way to interpret more of what you're saying. So if you feel comfortable with being recorded, please turn on your video while you're asking questions or making comments.
Y estoy prendiendo mi video porque muchos de los intérpretes que están trabajando con nosotros hoy o leen labios o leen las expresiones de la cara para mejorar su interpretación. Entonces, si se sienten cómodos, por favor, cuando están hablando, por favor, prendan su video.
And if you want to remain anonymous, then you can chat your questions to Sage, Lakaya, or Andrew, and then they can read them for you.
Si prefieren quedarse anónimos, pueden poner en el chat sus preguntas o a Sage o a Andrew o a Lakaya y los van a leer en voz alta.
Today we're going to have ASL closed captioning and Spanish interpretation. I'm going to turn it over to Jen. It's going to happen simultaneously, only this beginning is being interpreted for each line, but Jen's going to explain to us a little bit about how you can access the interpretation for today.
Hoy tenemos interpretación del inglés a la lengua norteamericana de señas, al español y a subtítulos en inglés. Eso va a suceder simultáneamente, pero ahorita voy a dar el micrófono a Jen para que explique cómo va a funcionar la interpretación el día de hoy. Buenas tardes todo el mundo. Como mencionó Kim, mi nombre es Jen. Estoy aquí con mi compañera Alexia de la colectiva Antena Los Ángeles.
Good afternoon, morning, everyone. Like Kim mentioned, my name is Jen, and I am here with my compañera partner, Alexia, and together we are part of a collective called Antena Los Ángeles.
También estamos aquí con Trisha y con Hercules haciendo interpretación en lengua de señas y también con Sally que está creando los subtítulos en inglés.
We are also here with both Trisha and Hercules doing ASL interpretation and also Sally doing the closed captioning.
Antena Los Ángeles y todo el equipo de Justicia y Lenguaje está aquí para interpretar entre inglés y otros idiomas dentro de un marco de justicia del lenguaje.
Antena and the rest of the language justice team is here today to interpret between Spanish and English and all of other languages to respect language justice.
La justicia del lenguaje incluye un compromiso de asegurar de que todas las voces se puedan escuchar. Quisiéramos reconocer principalmente todos los idiomas que se encuentran aquí hoy y también los idiomas de los pueblos indígenas de la tierra donde nos encontramos aquí en Los Ángeles, la tierra Tongva, donde su idioma sigue vivo en resistencia.
So language justice includes a commitment to make sure that every voice in this space is heard and all the voices can be heard. We also want to recognize all the languages here today, especially all the indigenous people's languages, wherever we are located, especially here in Los Angeles, Tongva people in the Tongva language, and which is still very much in resilience and resistance.
Hoy estaremos usando la función de interpretación de Zoom que varias personas aquí ya han usado antes.
So today we're going to be using the Zoom remote interpretation tool, which many people here today have used before.
En un minuto vamos a pedirle a Andy que la active y cuando la activa van a ver un mundito o los tres puntitos de más van a poder acceder a su canal de idiomas de inglés y español de esa manera.
So in a minute, we're going to ask Andy to activate that. Once that happens, you're going to see either an icon in the shape of a globe or 3 little dots, and through there you can access your preferred language channel.
Si tienen algún problema en acceder a la interpretación o con cualquier otro elemento tecnológico, por favor comuníquense en el chat o con Andrew, con Sage o con Lakaya.
So if you have any issues with interpretation or technology, please communicate that to Andrew or to, I missed the last tech person.
Sage y Lakaya.
Sage and Lakaya.
Entonces, en este momento voy a pedirle a Andy a que active la interpretación para Alexia y empezaremos la interpretación simultánea.
So right now I'm going to ask Andy to activate the interpretation function for Alexia, and we are going to be wrapping up with the announcement.
Okay, I'm going to do a quick tech check. I would like to see some thumbs up if folks can hear Alexia on the Spanish line. So if somebody would hop over to the Spanish line and let me know if you can hear Alexia, that would be great. A quick thumbs up so I can hear her myself. Great, thank you so much for that, Amy. Ahora voy a hablar en español. Y quisiera ver con un dedito para arriba si pueden escucharle a Alexia en la línea en inglés y seguiré con el resto del anuncio. Y a ver si alguien puede escucharle. Perfecto. Muchísimas gracias. Ahora, cada persona debe estar en el canal de idiomas que prefiere usar. Dos recordatorios rápidos. Si usted está en un canal de idioma, por favor, hable en ese idioma. Aquí en el espacio principal, las personas pueden hablar o en inglés o español, en lengua de señas o en su propio idioma y pueden autointerpretar. Vamos a repasar brevemente las mejores prácticas para la comunicación remota. Por favor, silencien sus micrófonos cuando no están hablando. Como mencionó Kim, pongan sus videos, por favor, si se sienten cómodos haciéndolo cuando están hablando. Estén pendientes, por favor, de comunicaciones de los intérpretes y los facilitadores. Si necesitamos que hablen un poco más despacio, vamos a pedirles eso para poder honrar todo su mensaje. Solamente una persona debe hablar a la vez. Es imposible interpretar a dos voces al mismo tiempo. Por favor, no cambien de idiomas dentro de una misma oración y hablen a un ritmo moderado y hagan pausas con frecuencia. Siempre es mejor respirar que dejar de respirar. Y por favor, digan sus nombres antes de hablar. Así las personas que están escuchando la interpretación sin ver el video sabrán quién está hablando. Sentimos una solidaridad tremenda con tanto la Coalición de Justicia para Jóvenes como los equipos de CAT 911 y para nosotros es un enorme placer. Participamos en uno de los equipos de CAT 911 y es un enorme placer estar aquí apoyando este espacio multilingüe. Muchísimas gracias. Y ahora, Andy, ¿me puedes hacer a mí? Intérprete también. Gracias.
So can I add you now, Jen, too?
Yep, sí.
Oh, thank you, everybody. And thank you so much to our interpreters. Please, as you're speaking today, whether you're a presenter, you're asking questions, you're giving a comment, try to speak as slowly as possible so that the interpreters don't have to rush too hard to get everything we're saying. And I'm like the most guilty of that. So really talking to myself more than anybody. I'm going to talk a little bit about Community Alternatives to 911, and then I'll introduce our first presenters for today. The first workshop will go to about 2:30. We'll take a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back for our second workshop. Community Alternatives to 911, also known as CAT 911, is an independent collective of individuals and grassroots groups building the skills, peer support, and resources needed to maintain cop-free zones across Southern California. CAT 911, or community action teams, are being organized within neighborhoods, schools, workplaces, and sectors. Sectors are areas of work. So for example, mental health workers or medics, medical workers, intervention workers working on the street to address conflicts between communities, K through 12 educators, etc. CAT 911 workshops are intended to build your team's skills to respond to addiction, overdose, sexual assault, domestic violence, emergency medical care, inter-neighborhood conflict, mental health intervention, cop watch, and police accountability. This September and the first part of October, we're having a four-part conference on how to build CAT teams. In order to get additional support in building cop-free zones where you live, work, or play, you can contact us at any time at cat911team@gmail.com, and I'll put that up in the chat also. Today we have a really exciting workshop. We've had amazing workshop presenters the last 2 weeks, and this is the third week of the conference. We're going to hear from 2 different groups who are building crisis response teams in their neighborhoods. The first team up is the Anti-Police Terror Project, and they've been working with families and communities most impacted by law enforcement violence. On October 27th, the Anti-Police Terror Project, also known as APTP, launched their Mental Health First in Oakland, a new model for non-police response to mental health crises. The service provides police-free emergency support services to people in Oakland experiencing a mental health crisis. Today, we're going to turn it over first to Carly Brannon, and that she'll present on mental health first and everything that's going on in Oakland. I do want to say that for all of us that are addressing police violence across the state of California and across the nation, APTP are heroes of ours. I know we've worked with them very closely on legislation and direct action, and we're so honored to have them here today. It's very difficult for me to even find adequate words to describe the magic in their work. So thank you so much, Carly, for being here, and appreciate you taking the time to share what you're doing.
Thank you so much for having us today. I really appreciate the passion here around helping each other and keeping each other safe. I apologize if my presentation seems a little rushed. I'm going to jam through some training that normally takes 4 hours to train. So I'm going to give a very quick overview of that and then talk a little bit more about how to actually build a team. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. So we found that it's valuable to first take a look at what we train our volunteers so that you can kind of have an idea of what response looks like. So our goal with Mental Health First is to interrupt and reduce police response to community members in psychosocial crisis. If you are not aware, 80% of unarmed people who are murdered by police are experiencing a mental health crisis at the time of their murder. The entire purpose of our model is to, of course, interrupt the police violence, but also to honor the agency and self-determination of our community members. When the typical Western medicinal response happens, it looks like a 5150 and placing somebody on an involuntary hold, which is largely not therapeutic. It does help for some people, but many people, particularly those who are more marginalized, it's more harmful than anything. We also want to break the stigma around mental health because people with mental illness are typically portrayed as unpredictable, violent, and dangerous. And really, it's quite the opposite. They are more at risk of experiencing violence than of perpetrating it. So what do our volunteers do? We have a 3-person volunteer team, and all of our interventions are non-punitive, they're de-escalation, they're life-affirming. And right now we're operating, in Sacramento at least, we're operating on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday nights from 7 p.m. until 7 a.m. because that's when the least resources are available. Of course, we are working on increasing our capacity so that we can increase our hours because we want to be available as much as we can to our community. We also have doctors on call, and that's just in case something happens that's outside of the knowledge or experience of our volunteers. So if somebody is experiencing a crisis that it would make sense to get them into a hospital, we can call the doctor on call and have them help us do a warm handoff with a hospital. We haven't had to leverage them in that way yet, but it's there just in case. One of the bullet points on here talks about starting buprenorphine if the patient's eligible. So that's if somebody's experiencing substance use disorder and has expressed interest in stopping. We of course do not push this on anyone because it's all about agency and self-determination. Okay. We currently do not refill medication. We don't prescribe any medication. We don't do any blood draws, lab work, anything like that. And these roles are always shifting too, particularly the doctor on call, because our doctors on call are as radical as the rest of us. And they're looking to depathologize mental health. So one thing that helps keep our volunteers safe is the Good Samaritan law. So this is what prevents us from huge lawsuits if something were to go wrong when we're providing care. So as long as we're acting in good faith, as long as we are not compensated for what we're doing, we're good. We just want to make sure that we're not acting in a way that could be considered gross negligence. So as an example, if you're providing CPR and you accidentally injure somebody, that's not necessarily gross negligence. We also aren't going to like intubate somebody because that is beyond our experience. That would be gross negligence, is doing something that's way outside of our experience and knowledge. Now, when we talk about our 3-person team, the team members discuss at the beginning of their shift what role they're going to take on. There's the crisis responder who engages the person who's experiencing the crisis. There is a medic who can help determine if what our participant is experiencing is perhaps a medical emergency rather than mental health. And then a safety liaison. So that's somebody who is going to look for any danger at the scene. Are there police there that need to be interacted with? The safety liaison is going to be the one interacting. If it becomes too hot at the scene, they can, of course, the decision will be made as a team, but they can help extract our team from the scene. And with these roles, we encourage our volunteers to have a discussion at the beginning of their shift, not only to talk about what role they want to take on, but also what is their experience, what are some potential triggers that they might have. Because let's say police trigger you, you probably don't want to be the safety liaison, right? So the way that we get our calls, people can call us, they can text us, they could direct message us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. We just identify ourselves. So I would say, hi, my name's Carly. How can I help today? Sometimes we're responding to messages that we got before we were open. So in that instance, we want to acknowledge, I apologize that it's taken us so long to get back to you. We only answer our messages when we're open, so on and so forth. And then we can also receive a call kind of while canvassing. By canvassing, I mean if we're out at a dispatch and we're coming back and we see something, or maybe it's a really slow night and we've decided to go out and kind of, I don't want to say patrol the area because that still feels very much like policing, and that's what we're trying to avoid, of course. But if we're out and we see somebody experiencing a crisis, we could then hop in as well. Okay. So I'm going to hop out of here. We have, the volunteer training is really, really in-depth. It goes into some common mental health conditions and what those look like and how to respond to them. A lot of the how to respond, though, is going to be situational because you can't treat everybody exactly the same because everybody is different. But we do give some examples in the training. We train our volunteers on harm reduction, on approaching situations in a trauma-informed and trauma-experienced way, because our volunteers are not necessarily all mental health professionals or medical professionals. While we do have those on our team, our volunteers are often medical students or just regular jerks doing the work like myself. We also include a basic like street first aid in our training. So if it'll help people determine if perhaps somebody is experiencing a stroke or hypoglycemia or another medical condition that can mimic a mental health crisis. Our volunteer training also includes a section on cop watch because sometimes the police are called to the scene. Sometimes we receive phone calls and the police are already there. Sometimes we receive phone calls that the police have been called and are on their way. And it's important that we show up to those instances so that we can document that and make sure that, well, make sure to the best of our ability that it doesn't escalate. The entire point of this is de-escalation, talking to people, bringing them back down to earth. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and switch over to our staff training because I think that that is more of what everyone is looking for, is how do you build the team, right? We already talked a little bit about who we are and how we got here. So we came up with this big list of things that we wanted for mental health first. And the person leading the workshop made us whittle it down to 5 things that are kind of absolute necessary for the program. PRN medication, which is as needed medication. Of course, we're not there quite yet, but that is a goal of ours, is to be able to provide medication as needed. Peer support, 24-hour access, again, a thing that we're working on. Vehicles. Here in Sacramento, there is an organization called Harm Reduction Services that we have partnered with, and they have an RV that they go out and provide services in, and they were gracious enough to donate their RV to us when they purchased a new one. So we're already part of the way there on vehicles. That really helps when we dispatch to situations, because we find that a lot of times we're called for people who live outside and are experiencing a crisis. And oftentimes the best way to help in that instant is to provide food and water and comfort. And with the RV, we could just store a whole bunch of stuff in there and bring it with us. Another goal is smart clearance. And what that is clearing a participant to go into a mental health facility without making them go through the emergency room. Currently, emergency rooms are typically the ones that would provide smart clearance to put somebody into a mental health facility. And that is just making sure that they're not experiencing a medical crisis that needs to be handled in a hospital setting rather than a mental health facility. I kept this slide in because it's just kind of cute to see our team. The The picture on the upper left-hand corner is from when Sacramento launched in January of this year. And on the upper right-hand corner, you'll see a picture that says Crises Act. That is AB 2054. My understanding is that is still sitting on Governor Newsom's desk right now. And the purpose of that act is to provide funding to community response teams, kind of taking some of that work off of the police that they are not skilled in performing and also not interested in performing. Okay, so here's the nitty gritty. Here's the good stuff. So the internal team, kind of the core team, we have the admin, that's me. I make forms, I love forms, I'm weird like that. We have logistics and support. So that's our team member who, when we need new technology or when we need something purchased, he goes out and kind of looks to see what's going to be the best for the team. We have our medical directors. They are doctors, both practice in family practice, and they just kind of make sure that what we're doing makes sense. They also have a slight amount of distance because of mandatory reporting guidelines, which we'll talk a little bit about in a minute here. We also have our program coordinator, Asantawa, who is also one of the co-founders of the Anti-Police Terror Project. She's pretty incredible. Our resource coordinator, who has been gathering what resources are currently available in our city and then going through and vetting them. Which ones interact with the police enthusiastically? Which ones interact with the police begrudgingly? You know, because it does make a difference. Also looking into what are things to say and not to say if you're calling for services for one of these other resources. As an example, if you want to get into an emergency respite in the area, you want to make sure that you don't tell them that you're seeking shelter for the night. You can't say, I need a place to sleep, because then you're shelter seeking and therefore it's outside of the scope of that respite center. Our training coordinator is Chayo. Unfortunately, they couldn't be here today. They are incredible. They're the one that put together our entire mental health first aid training. And they've done a lot of work on this. And then we have our volunteer or peer coordinator, who is the one who sends out the link to our volunteers to sign up for shifts. She reaches out to them, makes sure that they're still engaged, and helps kind of make sure that our program is working for our volunteers as well. So we, of course, developed this intentionally to be replicable, because we want other areas to be able to help their residents without the interaction of police, right? And every city is going to look a little bit different because the available resources look different. The demographics of your area might look different, and so your response might look different. But we have some kind of overall principles here. Our non-negotiables are there is no police involvement. Again, going back to that 80% of unarmed people murdered by police are experiencing a mental health crisis. We've got to stop that. Another non-negotiable is no perpetuation of any and all phobias and isms. We are an abolitionist, anti-oppression group. And then, of course, no abusive behavior toward other volunteers or participants, because this is all about liberation. It's all about keeping each other safe. kind of already went over all of these. So time commitments. We meet once a month just to talk about the program, review cases, see how things have been going, if we need to modify our approach to things, if we need to modify our policies. Shift coverage. In Oakland, their shifts are slightly smaller, and they actually cut them in half. Here in Sacramento, we've been doing 12-hour shifts, so all the way from 7 p.m. until 7 a.m., and each of our volunteers gets a 3 to 4 hour nap during their shift, because that is a really long shift. The reason that we have been running it that way here in Sacramento is because if we were to split it in half and do like 7 to 1 and then 1 to 7, we wouldn't be able to fill that 1 to 7 shift. In Oakland, of course, it's very different. They're working 8 p.m. until 8 a.m. and they have been able to slice their shifts in half because they are able to get volunteers to work that second shift. Our on-call doctor shifts, of course, are 12 hours. We don't bring them in too often, but they are there. They have been very helpful when we have needed them. Phone, email, work time, 8 to 10 hours monthly, and that's really going to vary. That's mostly the volunteer coordinator, the admin, and the program director. And then expected self-care time. In one of our more recent core team meetings, one of our action items was to do some self-care. And we went through and asked everybody what their self-care was going to look like. And we will be checking back in with each other in our next meeting to make sure that that self-care did in fact happen. Okay, mandated reporting. So I feel like I'm talking to people a lot. Does anybody have questions so far?
Yeah, this is AMJ, Cat 911, Long Beach, South Bayish. And I'm glad we're getting to the mandated reporters, because I am a social worker of sorts. Well, you don't need a story. Anyways, wondering, I'm wondering about like the legal issues around, like, especially no police involvement, right? You mentioned that a lot of times the police are not interested in doing this work, which I really appreciated. I also wonder if you get into like turf wars, territory wars, and they respond favorably or unfavorably to your work, and any other kind of legal battles that maybe we should be aware of as we prepare to replicate.
Gotcha. We have not had a lot of interaction with police yet, thankfully. I only know of one instance where we went out and cop watched. So right now, because of COVID, we're not having a team of 3 volunteers meet up in a tiny little clinic because there's no way to appropriately physically distance in that space. And it's a little bit more dangerous to dispatch right now as well. So as a general rule, we have not been dispatching because we've been passing the phone in between our core members and only having one person on shift each night. But there was an instance where I received a call from somebody who I know who has experience with cop watching, and he was calling saying that there was an unhoused person being harassed by police. And so I showed up and we cop watched from a distance. It was really interesting to see their response because they noticed that they were being observed. And sometimes that's helpful, sometimes it is not. In this case, it was helpful. And they actually treated the man a lot better once they saw eyes on them. They handed him a water and then they left him alone. You know, I anticipate that at some point there may be an interaction that has more conflict involved in it, but we haven't gotten there quite yet, thankfully. We haven't had any sort of legal things brought against us at all. But again, we're just within our first year, so that could change. The closest that we've gotten to being involved with any sort of like law enforcement is the Sacramento mayor, Darrell Steinberg. I'll withhold my judgment of him. He's terrible. He, after great pressure from the public, said that he wanted to start an outreach team to address things like mental health calls and calls regarding our unhoused neighbors without involving the police. And we were reached out to. We were involved in a meeting where he said that he wanted us to be at the table when this team was developed. His assistant really reinforced that he wanted us to be involved with this. And we have tried to contact the woman who is leading the effort to build this team. We've contacted her multiple times. She has not been responsive. And in fact, she did schedule a meeting and did not invite us. So I'll be interested to see how that turns out. We're kind of working internally on how to respond to that at this point.
Thank you for that. These are the things, as a social worker, like, I know people get real fussy about what they believe is their work and their role. And it's interesting is a great diplomatic way to put it.
Yes, yes.
We have some raised hands. I didn't get everyone. I saw Laura Hernandez.
And don't forget, if you're going to ask a question and you do feel comfortable being on film, it's better to put your video on. Better for the interpreters.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I'm just in a car, so. So I'm a social worker, and I asked my clinical supervisor about kind of these legal issues, and she said that, or he said that the only issue comes in with mandated reporting when there's a child welfare issue, if the child is in any harm at all. But in my opinion, and I don't know what anyone's opinion is, but my very personal, very strong opinion is that every time I've ever interacted with DCFS, they've made things much worse, and they're as bad or worse than the police. And so I'm wondering if you've ever had child welfare issues, and if you did, how did you guys resolve getting around mandated reporting as far as a situation that you feel like would not be better with DCFS, but you feel like you probably legally had to, contact them?
Excellent question. We have not yet gotten a call for anything that involves child welfare. And that is going to be a difficult thing to get around. When talking about mandated reporting, I think one thing that is important to consider is what the mandated reporter's personal risk tolerance is. So for myself, I am an independent living skills instructor in my time life. So I work with developmentally disabled adults, helping them kind of learn how to be independent. And I am a mandated reporter because of that role. I myself am willing to go against mandated reporting standards if I feel like that would place the participant at risk, because I don't have a license on the line. Yeah, I could get fired. Yeah, I could have to pay $1,000 fine. But I don't have a license that's writing on it. we do have people on our team who are doctors and nurses, and they do have a license. So that risk is increased. One thing that we do is if somebody who's responding is a mandated reporter, they can tell the person who's calling right off the bat, I am a mandated reporter. If you would prefer to speak to somebody who is not, I can pass you off to one of the other volunteers on shift. And so we just make sure that we don't have an entire 3-person team of all mandated reporters, right?
Thank
Yeah.
you. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. And it is a really difficult situation, you know? Yeah. And another thing is I justify things to myself a lot in my mind. With the mandated reporter thing, I'm like, I don't know that this would stand up in court, just to be extra clear. But the way I justify it to myself is I am a mandated reporter in my paid work. And this is not paid work. But again, I don't know if that would stand up in court.
That is what I've been told. This is AMJ again. That is what I've been told during my training, but it may vary by state. So you'll have to know your local laws.
Absolutely, 100%.
Corey had raised their hand and then Trudy was next. We can't hear you, Corey.
Here, how's this?
We can hear you now.
Thank you. My question is about geographical distance. Sacramento's pretty big, and so is Oakland, but I know that I'm in Albany, just north of Berkeley, and there's a sense that we can't possibly partner with Oakland. It's too far. It would take too long to respond. So I'm curious how you deal with the geographical radius and how you've thought about that.
Yeah, so thankfully we've had a really slow roll here in Sacramento. There are some shifts where we might get 5 calls in the night, and there are some shifts where we might only get 1. So that has really helped us. But we've also been pretty clear that our dispatch area is really based on our capacity. It's not by county lines, it's not by city lines. We are typically operating out of the Oak Park area, Del Paso Heights, Midtown. So those areas are closer to, say, West Sacramento, which is in Yolo County, closer to there than we are to, say, Fair Oaks, which is still Sacramento County. So it might be easier for us to respond to a different county than to the other side of our current one, you know? But we will dispatch wherever we have capacity to, if that makes any sense. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I'm sure determining that capacity is sort of a feeling it out over time. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, a lot of this work is just feeling stuff out, you know, whether it's determining where to respond to, if some place is too far, and also how to respond, you know. All right, do we have more questions?
You were up next.
Yes, I think Trudy is up next.
Okay.
Whenever you're ready, Trudy.
We can't hear you though, Trudy. We still can't hear you.
You can also put your question up in the chat, Trudy, and then someone could read it for you.
There was an earlier question in the chat about whether or not these slides will be made available to participants.
Let me check in with the team about that. I don't feel comfortable making that decision by myself. And to be honest, we didn't even discuss whether or not we would make them available before this, which we probably should have. So my apologies.
The other thing too is that if people have questions around not only getting to APTP, but getting to other groups across the nation that's doing this work, getting access to training manuals, materials, and also building here in Southern California with a CAT team that's already doing this work or about to do this work. We have a medic team here. Please contact us. I'll put CAT 911's email up so that you can use that as kind of a local bridge to things that you want to find out about in other parts of the country too.
Cool. And with the volunteer training that I skipped the vast majority of, we welcome you to attend one of our volunteer trainings. We should have another one coming up in November because we're training quarterly. And we would also be glad to schedule a whole separate one just for everybody here today. That way we can actually go through the meat of all of it. Because I know with the volunteer training, we absolutely want to make sure that somebody has gone through the training before we make those slides available.
Oh, just an announcement that K911, we're going to be starting our own training in January. We'll be starting the second Sunday of January. So we'll be covering similar materials. So if you're interested, just email us.
Very cool. Do we have more questions?
I think that's it for right now, Carly.
Okay, very cool. So this kind of digs into the Good Samaritan law a little bit deeper. Again, you're protected by the Good Samaritan law if you are acting in good faith, not being compensated for the work. You're providing medical or non-medical care, and the care was provided at the scene of an emergency. And then a quick note here, scene of emergency does not include emergency departments and other places where medical care is usually provided. And that is because that is a space where there are medical professionals to provide said care, right? And this is designed to protect those of us who perhaps might not be as qualified in giving care as a trained medical professional is. So I'm trained in basic first aid. I am trained in CPR. But there are going to be things that I'm not as trained in, of course, as a doctor or a nurse or an EMT. And the law also encourages people and bystanders to volunteer in emergency situations. Because without this law, they could be fined for accidentally hurting somebody when they're really trying to help, when maybe that person could have died without that help that they were provided, right? So we want to encourage people to actually assist. We also have insurance for the program because that Good Samaritan law applies to people who are not medical professionals, right? So there's malpractice insurance, which is, of course, a liability insurance purchased by healthcare professionals. It protects healthcare providers against lawsuits being filed under the complaint that they were harmed by negligence or intentionally harmful treatment decisions. It also covers the death of a patient, and anyone with a license already carries independent malpractice insurance as a safeguard. So like both of our doctors already have their own independent malpractice insurance because they are doctors. The registered nurse that's part of the program also has her own independent malpractice insurance, right? Now, the program overall has general liability insurance, sometimes called small business liability insurance or commercial liability insurance. And that covers the organization against claims made by people, including bodily injury, damage to property, or personal injury. Here in Sacramento, we carry our general liability insurance with Hiscox. And I believe that Oakland's chapter carries their liability insurance through the same company, just to keep it consistent and easy. Now, remember earlier we talked a little bit about the RV. This is some of the stuff that we bring with us. So we have a couple of different like totes full of stuff. One of them is our nutrition tote. And we have all kinds of different drinks that can be cold or hot. We have food that could be anything like chips and crackers to cup of noodles or pack of oatmeal, you know, something that feels a little bit more substantial. We often also have like a couple of apples and bananas or something, just so we can have some more nutritive food to provide people. Paper goods are the easiest thing to forget. So just a reminder, if you're providing food to people, it's also good to get forks and spoons and napkins and whatnot. I can't tell you how many just personal barbecues, picnics, whatnot that I've gone to where everybody brought the food but forgot paper plates or forks, you know. We also have a medic supply bag. So that's just in case something happens, you know. We have, as an example, we have earplugs in the medic supply bag. So if somebody is experiencing a mental health crisis and they're like severely overstimulated, earplugs might help. We also have some candies in our medic supply bag. So if somebody is experiencing hypoglycemia, we can give them that. Although my understanding is that providing somebody experiencing hypoglycemia with something sugary to drink, the body's going to absorb that better, which is why we also have Capri Sun in the bag. And then we have all kinds of other stuff. We've got our, you know, our medications over here, pain medication, aspirin, Tums, all kinds of different stuff. And this is what our medic bag looks like. So that list looked huge and scary, but it all fits within this bag. And then we also have a bunch of forms. I love forms. Not everybody does. But it's important for us to document things so that we can come back and debrief, and so that we can gather information to know if we need to shift the way that we do things. And also to see if there are things that we need to educate our community on. You know, we have gotten a couple of calls where people were in dispute with their neighbor, and helping them was just talking them through how to talk to their neighbor, you know. So that kind of, if we get a lot more calls like that, that might tell us that we need to develop a training for our community on how to handle interpersonal conflict with the person who lives next door, you know. So we've got things like agreements with our volunteers. I'm going to pull that up real quick. And a lot of this is very no nonsense. I apologize for the length of time that this is going to take to pull up. I am working off of the hotspot on my phone because I do not have Wi-Fi.
Hey, Carly, if it's okay, maybe while it's coming up, a couple people raise their hands. Well, no,
Yeah.
you want questions now?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and take questions.
Corey raised their hand, and then Abba.
With food, I was wondering if dietary restrictions have come up as an issue. Like, I know cup noodle was on there, and that's not always vegetarian, and then there's kosher, halal.
Right, that has not come up yet, but that's an excellent thing to talk about. So dietary, I'm writing myself a note. Okay, I'm going to bring that back to the team and just make sure that we have things that would work. I know we have some like fruit cups and stuff, so that would typically work for somebody who's vegetarian, but also if that person is diabetic, that's probably not the right look because there's lots of sugar in those things. So thank you for that. I'll bring that back. And then of course, you know, halal and kosher.
And then Ava or Ava also raised their hand. Oh, I guess they put their hand down.
I think they're hopping back onto the meeting. So in the meantime, AMJ, if you're ready, you can go.
Yeah. I was wondering, I might have missed it, but do you have anything on board for like anxiety or for stimming, or, you know, in case someone who's autistic, or just stuff to help people get grounded or express themselves or expel extra energy and stuff like that?
You know, we don't have any like tools that we bring along with us for that. Typically in a situation like that, we would use some sort of a grounding exercise with them, whether it's, you know, square breathing or doing that using each of your 5 senses grounding exercise. But that's a good idea to have like stimming tools. All right, I'll bring that
Carolina had typed a question whether over time you've received funding from public and private entities.
You know, we started this with only $400. And that was just donations from the community to our Venmo. So very, very grassroots. There is a grant that we're supposed to be receiving, and that's going to assist us in providing training. So that's going to assist us with providing people with technology to be able to attend our training during these times of COVID when we're doing everything virtually. But that's it so far. I'm not sure if there are other grants in the works. But yeah, we're running this on pretty low budget so far.
I've got a question. You gave an example about a neighbor dispute, and it really ended up just being helping with communication. Have there been instances where your input or help is not invited, they don't want to hear from you, so you just leave because you're not invited into the situation, or what does that look like?
That has not happened yet, but I say yet because I'm certain that it will eventually.
Mm-hmm.
Again, everything is so situational. If we got somewhere, let's say somebody saw something happening and we arrived based on like that bystander call, and let's say that person doesn't want our help, we're just going to disengage.
Okay.
You know, because again, everybody has agency and self-determination, and if the person experiencing the crisis is not open to receiving help, we can't force it on them.
Right. And then what about, has there ever been any language barriers where the person you're assisting speaks a different language than the 3 people on the shift?
That's another thing that we have not experienced yet, but our team is researching what kind of resources we can use in that kind of situation. We are looking for bilingual or multilingual volunteers, and also looking into what interpreter service might be helpful.
I see. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any more questions?
Just to highlight, Suzette shared if it helps, they'd be willing to contribute their skill set to the nutrition stuff. They're registered dietitian.
Oh, that would be wonderful. Yeah, if you can just drop your email in the chat, send it to me privately in the chat. I will definitely connect with you offline. Thank you for your help with that. I appreciate it. Okay. Oh, I don't know why this says test. This is a volunteer agreement, period. So a lot of this on our agreement with our volunteers is very no nonsense. Number one, prioritize your own physical and mental health above volunteering. Just like when you're on a plane and they're talking about put your mask on before you help your neighbor put their mask on. It's the same in the outside world like this. At one point we had a volunteer who signed up for multiple shifts every weekend for like the first month that we were open, and we tapped in with them offline and we were like, this is a lot of work and this work can be very heavy. And that person did decide to bring down the number of shifts that they were going to work, because it was going to place them in a space that was very uncomfortable for their mental well-being. Treat all human beings with respect and dignity, of course. With our group here in Sacramento, we have shirts that say MH First on the front. That way, if we show up to a scene, we're easily identifiable as somebody who helps. That way, it's less off-putting to the person who we are showing up to assist. And it's also helpful if we end up interacting with law enforcement. They can see that we are there to help the person. Of course, we'll verbally identify ourselves as well, or our safety liaison would do so, but the shirts help with that. And because we're using those shirts to identify ourselves as MH First and as being on shift, we only wear them during our shifts because we don't want to be like out at the grocery store or even out at an event, a community event, and have people come to us. You know, I mean, of course we do want people to come to us for help, but we don't want to identify ourselves as being on shift when we're not. We want to refrain from contact with participants outside of our shift because we want to maintain proper relationships with people, right? If we run into a participant, and let me rewind a little bit. Participant is the word that we use instead of client because client just seems so clinical and kind of like detached, whereas participant is more participatory, of course. But if we were to run into a participant, like just during the day or whatever, we're going to let them lead on whether or not they want to say hi. We're not going to be like, hi, I talked to you when you were experiencing a mental health crisis, because that's sharing people's business, which we are not in the business of doing. We want to maintain their confidence. No, agreement number 6 always makes me giggle a little bit. Sex is not therapeutic in the context of providing MH First services. What that means is if we're dispatching, we're not dispatching to sleep with our participants, obviously. You would think that that's something that we wouldn't have to talk about, but a lot of like mental health professionals that lose their license do so because of inappropriate relations with their clients, you know, with their patients. Don't reply to MH First calls when you're not on shift. Don't tamper with the devices, yada, yada, yada. All basically very no nonsense. And then what happens if something happens that's in conflict with these agreements? We would then just bring it back to the team and discuss it. If it's something egregious, of course, we're going to immediately ask that person to no longer volunteer with us. If it's like a little thing, we might have a conversation with that person and just be like, hey, knock it off, don't do that again. You know, that was harmful and this is why. Can we have you contract for safety with us around that, you know?
Ava raised their hand for a question.
Yeah, I'm wondering, you mentioned the t-shirts, and it made me wonder, how do community members currently know that MH First, is it MH First? Am I saying that correctly? How do community members even know that this exists in the first place? Like, how is it being campaigned or marketed?
Great question. So it's been mostly through social media, if I'm being honest.
Okay.
We also had a launch event back in January where we invited people to come and meet us and hear our story of how we came to be and take a look at our medic bag and all that good stuff. But yeah, it's mostly been online. We're also working on getting some flyers so that we can distribute those to different places. We've also somehow become pretty popular with other programs. Our very first call was from another program. It was a transitional youth aged shelter, and they didn't have room for somebody, and they called us and we're like, do you have a couch you can sleep on? And they're like, oh yeah. So it's really cool because we've been able to also help other programs help influence how they interact with their participants. And through that, we've built some good relationships, and they have started referring people to us as well. So there's
I
a lot of
see.
word of mouth that's happening outside of the social media.
And so you or MH First didn't directly contact these organizations. These organizations happen to have found you probably on social media.
I would say it's a mix.
Okay.
I know before we actually launched, Asantawa went out and I believe she talked to a couple of different programs. She mostly, though, talked to like fire stations to get them on board with it. And they were like, yeah, we would rather call you than call the police. We haven't had any contact from fire yet, though. I think that there's probably some legal thing where they have to contact the police instead of us.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hello.
Hello. Do we have another question?
I think that's it for now, Carly.
Okay, cool. Very cool. So we also have our training available to our volunteers when they're on shift. That way they can refresh themselves, because somebody might volunteer once a month, you know, and our skills diminish if we don't keep in constant practice with them, right? So we have our training handbook available to them. We also have like an onboarding checklist, which goes over showing them around the place, showing them what our dispatch vehicle looks like. It was one of our volunteer trucks, and now it's an RV. So this just kind of goes through everything that we want them to look at. We have our volunteer training is more around how to respond, but our onboarding training like this is how to open up. Where do we go to get the files? What time do we need to be there? What are the things that we're looking for in the shed? Because we use a shared space with a clinic. So we want to make sure that we're grabbing our own materials and not theirs, right? Talks about determining the nap and phone schedule. So who's answering when versus who's napping when, determining your role, talking about your triggers, things like that. We only have a few minutes left, so I'm not going to go through each and every one, but we have different training modules on how to answer a call, how to close up. I want to show you our call tracking form. So this is something that we use on every call. And this is how we get kind of our more basic data. How did they contact us? Because we have many different ways that people can contact us. Was the person who called us the person experiencing the crisis? Somebody who knows or is bringing the person in crisis? Or is it another program, like we kind of talked about earlier? We're tracking call date and time as well as response date and time. The reason that those are two different things is perhaps we received a phone call on a Wednesday, but we're not open until Friday. So call date would be Wednesday, response date would be Friday. And that helps us to look at, okay, when we do start expanding, if we're only able to do like 1 or 2 more days, what are the days that we're receiving more calls, and we'll expand to those days first, right? And then the basics. What was their most basic need? Was it the food? Do they need safety planning because they're in a domestic violence situation? We don't respond to active scenes of violence, so we wouldn't like run out there and like bust into the apartment where, you know, the people living together are physically fighting, if we do get one of those phone calls, we would ask the person if they could get to a safe place, and then we'll meet them and help them safety plan. And that safety plan might involve us giving them a ride to their friend's house or somewhere else that they can stay. We do a lot of safety planning, and there's no specific format for that. It's really just having a conversation with that person to figure out, what is your most immediate need? How do we keep you safe right now? And then moving forward, how do we maintain that safety in the best way possible? Cross streets, just in case we end up dispatching. Zip code, sometimes we won't fill out until afterwards. That's just so we could track any trends, like in Meadowview, there might be more calls about homelessness. In Oak Park, there might be more calls regarding neighbor disputes or whatever. That way we can, again, go back, look at trends, and develop targeted responses for areas that need specific things. If police are there, or if police have been called, outside of COVID times, we will automatically dispatch. And I say outside of COVID times because, again, because of COVID, we're only having one person on shift at a time, and we don't want people dispatching by themselves, especially to a situation that could be dangerous. Our EMTs there, that's another reason that we might dispatch immediately. And then did we dispatch or not? So this is all stuff that's not really, not necessarily identifiable. It's not protected health information. This is just for trending so that we could shift our program as needed. It's information that we could get out to our stakeholders, which might be people who are interested in giving us funding, but most importantly to our community. Those are our most important stakeholders. And then we also have a more detailed form that we use, and we actually fill this one out because right now we don't have a way to store this electronically that is with HIPAA. We are working on getting a EMR, electronic medical record system, that is in the works, but we don't have it yet. So this has more detailed information about, you know, we can get the person's name, date of birth, gender, what their needs are, and then specific notes about what this specific situation is, you know. So I know that was a lot in a very, very short time frame. If y'all would like us to do a more in-depth training, we would be glad to do so. Please reach out. We're at mhfirstsac@gmail.com. There is also MH First, which, because I apparently did not prepare well, I don't have their email address. So my apologies for that. I'm looking it up right now. Yeah, MH First Oakland is at aptp.mhfirst.oak@gmail.com. They launched about a month ago today. And Sacramento launched back in January, but feel free to reach out if you'd like us to schedule additional, more in-depth training if you have any questions. And we have just a couple more minutes for any questions that you might have for me while I'm here.
We have about 5 minutes for questions, folks, so try to be brief. Question.
Just a little information for folks interested in doing stuff in Southern California. We're hoping to start our own rapid response systems in our different areas next winter. So our training will be starting in January. So if you're interested in that, sign up. And also, we're created so many of us are part of the CAT 911's decarceral mental health sector. So besides creating rapid response systems, we're also creating kind of a Yelp-like guide for decarceral services in Southern California. And if you can build towards it, and it'll be a guide that will have an app, and then people can also be able to review and provide feedback based on people actually accessing the services. So I'm going to put that in the link. If you can add to any services that you know about, that would be helpful for us to all know about in Southern California.
Beautiful.
Okay, it's AMJ again. And Carly, I was wondering, do you all have any follow-up or like referral, connecting people to make sure they don't kind of get lost after you interact with them?
That's all very case by case basis. So unfortunately, we don't have the capacity yet to follow up from like a professional standpoint to make sure that they're getting that wraparound care with like maybe regular appointments with a therapist or psychiatry. But we can reach out afterwards. I had one person call in crisis, of course. And part of our safety plan was that I contact them a couple days later to follow up to see how it went when they contacted the resource that I referred them to. So that's kind of the level of follow-up that we provide right now. I think in the future, it would be great if we could partner with a clinic that would be able to have a more official follow-up, I guess. I hate the word official or professional or whatever.
Okay, I hope I'm not overstepping. I'm wondering if you have yet to see the same people multiple times. Yeah.
We do have some repeat participants.
Yeah. That's why I asked the first question, because I mean, look at where we live. Thank you very much.
100%. Yeah, and our repeat folks are people who are calling in about themselves, typically. And most of the time, we just need to talk to them for a little bit. They just need to be heard and witnessed. You know, a lot of it is people experiencing oppression. You know, it's people trying to survive in this carceral world that is driven by capitalism and anti-Blackness and, you know, transphobia and misogyny. And those are things that, like, even following up with maybe like a psychiatrist isn't necessarily going to do what it needs to do, you know? I mean, medicine does help, right? I take medicine. But yeah, a lot of it's just that building long-term relationships with the people, being able to talk them down or talk them through, rather.
Carolina had also raised their hand.
Sure. Carly, you mentioned that, well, we all know police are not skilled at doing a lot of these things and they're not interested. Are you finding that any of the police are actually telling community members to call you?
No. Sorry, that was a quick answer. Absolutely not. The closest we've gotten to that was when I was called by a community member when I was not on shift with MH First, and I showed up to a scene where they had somebody who was experiencing both a mental health and medical emergency at the same time. And they had this man in handcuffs, and he's clearly not well. And I talked to the officer and really advocated for him, and I could see the shame in her eyes, because I was like, handcuffs are not therapeutic, you know? And I could see that she was experiencing shame at their response to him. I don't think that she would have people contact us in the future, but I think that she will hopefully think twice before she puts the next person in handcuffs when they're experiencing crisis like that.
I have a quick question, just about, you have a line for gender, and I'm curious how that goes in terms of self-disclosure and all of that stuff.
Yeah, this is all based off of what the person is willing to share with us. Because some people are not comfortable. They might, people might not actually be the gender that they present as, or that we perceive them to be. And they might not feel safe telling us that they don't identify with that gender. Everything is just what they're comfortable reporting. And when we're talking to the person, we're not going through like it's a checklist. Okay, now I need your gender. Now I need what your ethnicity is. These are just things for us to collect if it makes sense in the moment.
So you leave it blank if it's not shared?
Yes, if it's not shared and if it does not feel natural to ask, we will absolutely leave it blank.
Everyone, I'm so sorry we've run out of time. It was amazing, Carly. We have another presentation that's about to start in a few minutes. But can everyone go off of their mute and just make as much noise as possible for Carly and this amazing presentation?
Thank you so much.
Carly. Absolutely wonderful. So impressive. Really impressive.
Excellent.
Fantastic.
Amazing presenter.
Back down, holding
Thank
it down.
you.
And please please get back to us about the slides too.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Carly. I think you heard it all. And I'm sure there's more too that is in people's hearts. We're gonna take a 5-minute break. So if everyone could come back at 2:38, 2:40 at the latest, we'll get started with LA CAN, Los Angeles Community Action Network. And again, Carly, thank you so much from everybody here in SoCal.
Thank you. I appreciate y'all.
Overwhelmingly people of color, overwhelmingly Black, increasingly women and children becoming a part of this thing, a large community of queer trans folks as well, particularly Black trans women. So, but yet at the same time, having said that, I think the community provides a model for us as well, a model for everything that any other resident or any other community would have, you know, a model of where, with all its complexities, all its lack of resources, people coming together, people watching each other's back, people sharing the littlest amount of resources, but also people, in a sense, you know, just as any other community, interpersonal violence is real. Various types of violences are real. Sexual assault is real. So when we look at Skid Row, I think our hope really is for the community, not to, for folks who are not there, not to objectify it, not to look at it as the other, but as an extension of ourselves, as an extension of our families, as an extension of our neighborhoods, as an extension, because these are our families, these are our siblings, these are the folks that we grow with. For me, I mean, on a personal level, I want to take a moment to lift my own personal inspiration, Chella Coleman. Chella, who is just absolutely one of the most powerful people that I know. I mean, they are just an amazing, but yet at the same time, Chella providing a whole lot of inspiration. And there's so many other folks in Skid Row that I can talk about. And just on a quick note about Cat 911, I also want to kind of just throw this conversation in there, that we also look at these challenges very critically as well, because we don't go out there and tell people not to call 911. We don't go out there and because when the issue of resources, issue of what is available. So I think while we definitely, our battle and our journey is total abolition of the system, complete dismantlement of the system. But in that journey are all these complexities as to what yet remains to be done. We don't want to leave an impression that we are fully equipped to deal with what are going on. We don't want to leave an impression or even a false illusion that we have all the resources. But as we also talk about dismantlement of structures and resources, we also are fully aware that what are some of those structures that we can take over ourselves? What are those structures that when we talk about complete dismantlement, it's the white supremacy that needs to be dismantled. It's the other pieces that people, our own communities have absolutely developed and created, that we take ownership to these structures as well. So in a sense, on our personal notes as well, we have reached out to 911. As so much health is compromised and other issues are compromised. So it's a journey that we're all on. A lot of unanswered questions yet to be examined. But happy to be here and would love to continue these conversations as well. So with that, what our plan is to have Chella and Jamie speak about their personal experience of how community comes together, how we build power, how do we look out for each other, and how community can pool in resources as an example of going and being dependent on a system. We'll also then talk about, Mariela is going to speak about a project that was built in partnership with the community around our data bodies, that how surveillance and data collection is completely datafying our bodies, but how people have come together in Skid Row and even developed in our partnership with other cities as well, a whole playbook, which is an extremely empowering exercise too. And then Todd Cunningham, who's going to speak about the community garden, which is providing fresh resources to Skid Row people. Also the mutual aid that is going on as a result of COVID, how communities have come together and how thousands of meals have been shared and people have broken bread together. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Chella and Jamie. Thank you.
Thank you, Hamid. Do you mind if I go first, Jamie?
No, of course, please.
Okay. First and foremost, my name's Chella. I am an organizer in Skid Row, and I live in Skid Row, and I breathe it. Let's just be honest. But I also want to acknowledge that I am a Black trans woman. And for those that don't know, there was a trans Black woman that was murdered and another Black trans woman that was shot by the police. So I'm just bringing those stories in, right, as we talk about these things. As we talk about, I like the, community's safety. I don't like to say policing ourselves. I say it's community safety, right? I think in terms of like the things that I've learned from Stop LAPD Spying and a bunch of other collectives that I've worked with, that like there's just a lot of not understanding what the police and what 911 is really here to do, right? That it's not here to serve and protect, that it is here to surveil and murder. And I'm giggling because that's just real, that's me being honest, me being authentic. Another thing is thinking around community safety. I remember just remembering about 6 years ago, a trans woman was gunned down in Skid Row. And right away, when they saw the person that had the gun, they tackled him. Like the community, not the police, but they tackled him. Or I'm thinking of like other stories that I've also lived through where I've seen a neighbor get assaulted who is a woman, and I've had to, go and mediate for her, right? I think a lot of the times we don't think that it's in our power to do these things, but it is. Because as we see, the state is not here to help. The state is not here to help us survive. It's only here to, you know, support itself and its white supremacist capitalistic ideals. Another thing is just being honest. I think, you know, organizing, one of the biggest things that I did this year, just to be personal, is organizing around pride, right? Long story short, heard that there was a group that was organizing with police to have them march with them, and I did not like that. So me and some other folks got together and we shut it down. We had folks who were cop watching. We had folks who were community safety watching. We had folks who were, you know, especially because there's still a pandemic, we still had things, you know, like hand sanitizing and stuff to give, and also just taking up space, right? Because a lot of these movements aren't inclusive of Black trans people or disabled Black people, right? And so we have to remember who's left out of the conversations, right? That brings me to my last point of like, who is left out of these conversations? I'm gonna be completely honest and authentic and real right now. When I signed on and I saw that there was an ASL interpreter, I was, yes, I snapped that, you know, because that's very inclusive, right? A lot of the time people don't think about, you know, accessibility for other folks, right? And it's not to say that people who don't think about them are bad. It's just that we have to think about, when we say Black Lives Matter, we mean all Black Lives Matter. It's either the most marginalized of us or it's none of us, right? And so thinking around like terms of Black trans women, sex workers, those who are literally on the front lines right now, giving their bodies for you know, calling for justice for Tony McDade and George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, are queer femmes, are trans Black femmes. Yet when we get murdered, there's the only coverage that happens is between ourselves, our community as trans community, or I don't like the term allies, but just for this conversation, our allies. And so that's gotta be changed, you know? So I'm always bringing that voice of wherever I go. Like wherever I go, if I go to a conference, I'm always bringing stories of Skid Row folks of all types, right? Because I've been living here for like 8-9 years now, and I've been organizing for about 6 or 7 of those years. And so I cannot do this work without remembering them, without remembering the folks that we are leaving behind. So yeah, those are the things I really wanted to say. I am going to let Jamie take it away. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Chella. Thank you so much. And it's been really an honor to be working with you and to be learning with you and building power with you. So, hey folks, I'm Jamie. I've been organizing with the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition for coming on to a decade, and I have to say that LA Can and the Stop LAPD Spying NYJC have also raised me as an organizer and have been very influential in not only understanding and organizing and building power against the police state, but also in learning how to build community. And that really is the essence of mutual aid, and developing alternatives and learning what kind of power we need to build to create the systems that we want. So I came into this work. I am a registered nurse. I work in the community of Boyle Heights. I work on an acute care unit that also services oncology patients as well. So that work has definitely intersected with my organizing work. I think unintentionally most of the time, where in building community, you build networks, but also now more formally becoming more intentional with other healers, with other folks that want to map systems of domination and for those folks who want to envision something different for health and wellness. So I wanted to kind of just first start like how this operates for me in my life and how it expands out into the organizing world in building that power. So first and foremost, as a nurse, you know, I think in building community and in whatever kind of, you know, intervention specialty you may carry, whether it's, you know, being able to de-escalate, whether you are good at math, whether you are an artist, whether you are some type of healer, whatever your skill is, it's really being able to communicate within the community that you're available. And that was one of my first journeys, was really letting folks know that I was available. I started off by running the medical tent at Occupy LA, and you know, first started to intervene in people's lives in an unstructured and unkind of supervised way, in a sense. And what could I do, and what were my limitations? And you know, in that sense, having a license, a state license, I had to be very clear about what my abilities were outside of like an actual structure or a network or supervision, in a sense. And so that was kind of like the beginning of my journey. But really, in starting to be more and more present at LA Can, it was how I started to build community with different people who would basically come with questions. And so that one-on-one sessions that I would have, where I would help people not only navigate medicines that they were given, you know, diagnosis they were given, conversations that we were given, being present in the hospital and teaching them how to guard and how to make folks in the hospital very aware that you're paying attention. I always say having the notebook and the pencil is probably the most biggest form of protection you could ever have in the hospital, especially when you have a loved one. And now we're challenged in those times of COVID. Fortunately, my hospital, one person is allowed in the hospital with your loved one. But, you know, prior to this moment, and now we're organizing into how to navigate that as well, seeing that even calling into the hospital, you run into all these different difficulties. But again, being able to document, being able to, you know who the physicians are, know what the medications are, and then having an ally, somebody that can help you navigate through that, and that ally being available. So that was kind of one of the first ways that I started to intervene. I think the second way, and this kind of was an extension out of Occupy, was starting to build my own network of people that I knew who were not only politicized, but also had an analysis of the current situation and a strong analysis of the healthcare system. And so, I mean, not only other practitioners that aren't involved in Western medicine, which are very important because they support you in your critiques of Western medicine, but also those who operate within, working with physicians, working with specialties within physician, like infectious disease doctors, also working with nurse practitioners. And so in that way, I started to informally create my own network of people that were politicized and did understand the problems that exist. Because a lot of times when you're working within these networks, and I work inside of a hospital, you're confronted with a lot of systemic racism. And so you have to kind of, bob and weave to find those people that not only want to make themselves available, but have that analysis to understand why they need to be available and why they need to consider, coming at a health situation from different angles. So, and a lot of times folks would, again, have those limitations and how they're available, whether it's time, whether it's licensing. But, I think, again, it's always I always encourage that people are fully aware of what they are, in some senses, risking when we do engage in kind of giving advice, in helping with treatments outside of being within a structure, because we are bound by legalities, and so that can also get tricky. But regardless, there's so many of us out there that still operate that way. And so I've had definite moments where even folks within my own network at the hospital have, as a favor, just seen a friend or helped to intervene. So I think third is also, especially during this time of COVID, one of the third ways that I got involved was really developing my own mutual aid network. And sometimes I think there is power in your own self-care and in your own kind of preservation of life, and realizing that, you know, we have to preserve ourselves to continue the fight. That I became involved in a mutual aid network in Long Beach, where I live. And that network really, what we're, again, like-minded individuals politically with an analysis, understanding the, you know, the limitations of the current systems we're working with, but also at the same time wanting to push those limitations, being emotionally and physically ready to support each other. I think the things that we were able to do in that network to take care of each other was we started off just kind of first talking about what it was that we wanted to do, you know, understanding and kind of sharing that space of the you know, vulnerabilities of, you know, organizing and just being alive during a pandemic. And I think that's a first for everybody. And I think when we confront it this way, we, hey, Andy, how's it going? Andy is actually part of that mutual aid network. So hi, Andy. And so we really kind of focused on seeing each other, and then getting consent, really getting consent in realizing that if we were to get sick, we needed people that were going to intervene for us, but that needed to kind of understand a certain extent of our healthcare issues, right? So if you do get sick with COVID and you were needing to go into the hospital, did you want, you know, what hospital did you want to go to? Did you want to go to the hospital? Because I've been in spaces in organizing where people clearly told me they have no interest in going to the hospital at all if they contracted COVID. So really there was a sense where that consent had to be laid out, and then also consent to receive information. So that's why there was a lot of conversation around building that trust, because you were about to open up your kind of medical history to folks. There was that exchange. There was an exchange of environmental safety. What kind of home did you live in? How could people access it? Because we know with dealing with COVID, there's a gradation of symptoms getting worse and needing to have that regular check-in. And then at a certain point, if you were needing assistance, that someone could actually remove you from the home and get you to a hospital. And then also to advocate for you to even be admitted if that was your choice, because a lot of times we were hearing stories of people not being admitted, people being sent back home, and people you know, not faring well, dying at home. So so there was really that need to not only, you know, have that trust, understand your medical history, but then have people who are willing to be advocates. A second thing was a lot of training, right? Because we needed to understand what we were up against. And so we did our own informal personal protective equipment training, learning what we needed to have in order to enter a home with someone who had COVID, because I've worked on the COVID unit, so it's very serious when you enter into an enclosed airspace. Now we're learning more right now how enclosed airspaces are one of the most dangerous places, that, you know, droplets stay within an enclosed airspace that has very poor ventilation for several hours. And so the winter seasons are coming, so we really need to consider how we are opening up our spaces to people and making sure we are really keeping tight with our network and, you know, monitoring each other. And a lot of us share a living in space with larger amounts of people. So just understanding that precaution and being sure when we mix households that we're very aware of how we're mixing, and trying to at all times to maintain, you know, big gatherings outdoors. And if not, just being very clear about the risks that we're taking when we meet indoors. So, so anyways, and then we developed phone trees. And from that moment, there was a big alleviation where we started just being present with each other in moments, not only that we were experiencing, that were everyday moments, but realizing those moments were not only being kind of experienced under a pandemic and then under all these rebellions. And so even like a simple text was providing so much support, a simple outlet of people knowing that people were there for you. And then I'm not going to disclose a lot. on this next moment, because I do believe that people have autonomy to talk about their own personal health experiences, but we were also able to transition that mutual aid network to care for somebody else who did actually have a health condition that they needed to have addressed. And so all of a sudden we kind of saw the fruits of our labors engaged. And we were able to clearly set up a phone tree. We were able to clearly organize ourselves to be available and present for this person. And so that was really exciting to see that all that work we put into it, we were able to not only and activate ourselves not only in Long Beach, but a network of people in Los Angeles to be able to care for somebody. So, that own self-preservation, that own self-networking to preserve yourself ends up becoming an extension for the community. I think last thing I wanted to bring up is that now I'm kind of transitioning, not giving up the work of the coalition, because there's plenty of work there that I'm engaged in, but now as the coalition starts to look at the kind of systems of domination and really mapping out what we call the stalker state, which is how surveillance and technology exchanges information through multiple systems. So seeing that the healthcare system is a part of that, and seeing that public health is a part of that. So now moving into kind of mapping that structure, because in the coalition, one of our biggest kind of discussions is that you have to know your fight, to know your power, to know how you're going to throw that wrench, which is what I like to say. So if we don't understand the systems that we're up against and the systems of domination that we want to dismantle to recreate, not only do we run the fear of recreating those systems, but a lot of times those systems will just morph themselves and come back in a different shape. We have to be very careful right now, because we're talking about shifting monies into systems that have policing infused in them.
Jamie, just a slight interruption. Can you speak a little bit slower for the?
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Thank you for the reminder. So, but seeing that those systems are infused with policing. So how are we understanding how policing is a part of that? And that's something that Mariela will be kind of speaking more about. But in this network, I think what is so exciting is that not only are we building a collective of healers and practitioners that want to come together to be available, but we also want to look at how to dismantle this system, how to recreate the system. What can we do to preserve a certain portion of it that is servicing our community? One of the biggest kind of complications that came out of the Affordable Care Act was actually the draining of our last vestige of free healthcare. And that is through the public healthcare, public county system. And so though there are many, complications with every hospital system, it is the last of what is free. And so the Affordable Care Act essentially sold that entire system to private insurance companies. And that was the most dangerous thing that happened, because now as years go on, less and less money goes into those systems. So I think understanding those things now and kind of being able to intersect, not only working with community, but understanding systems and how we can intervene, how we can preserve, and how we can transform is a really exciting moment now. So I'm going to stop there. And again, I'm so sorry that I started to speed up. I think I got a little anxiety that I was talking for a long time, but thank you for the reminder. I definitely extremely appreciate it. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Jamie. So we're going to now pass it over to Mariela.
Thank you so much, Amy, and everybody. It's so good to be here with all of you. My name is Mariela Saba. Just really grateful to be alive and grateful to have these conversations together that mean so much to our ancestors and mean so much to the generations ahead. So just really appreciating that we've gathered, and we will continue to gather and build our power together. Jamie gave me a really good segue. I want to talk about why it's important to understand the systems that we're trying to dismantle. And I want to talk about the work of our Data Bodies project. That is work I want to share with you and stay in dialogue about with you. But while you were sharing, Jamie, I took a nap before this session, and while you were sharing, I remembered my dream, and I'm going to share that I dreamt that LAPD flew in a little tiny helicopter into my room where I was sleeping, and that I fought back by recording it and putting it live to all of you, and that I broke off the little a little piece of it so that it couldn't fly anymore, and then outside of the room we were having a community event and screening some movie on the wall, and that reminded me of the work we did with YJC Youth Justice Coalition when YJC was projecting awesome films like COINTELPRO related to our work on the LAPD headquarters. So I was in tune with us, and I just wanted to share that I'm living and dreaming about this. And I want to introduce myself in that way. And thank you for the space. I'm glad we're dreaming that we can dismantle these systems and build community spaces that take care of each other. So our Data Bodies project came about in January 2016. It was just a natural next step in the coalition. Our coalition, as we've been sharing, has been exposing policing in a very unapologetic way, very bold ways, and has brought the conversation of surveillance up front, that we don't miss that part of the system that watches us. That is a key part of how the system has been oppressing and dominating us. So what we wanted to do with our Data Bodies project is have a greater understanding of how systems work, and to understand that we have a lot of understanding. So let's get together and see what do we mean by systems. And when we talk about dismantling or abolishing the police, what do we mean? And what we wanted to look at is, how is the police badge being worn by other systems? How is it that it exists within healthcare systems, within education systems, within our transportation systems, so that we have a lot more clarity around what we are dismantling, and that we understand this stuff is it's deeply rooted in all the systems that were built on enslavement and slavery and genocide, everything that came from it, and is managing one of our human needs. Many of our human needs are being managed by systems of policing. We have the human need to move and travel about, and we have big systems like Metro running that. We have the housing HACLA system here, the housing system in LA, and that is working intricately with police, and they're managing our human need to shelter. So we wanted to dig deeper. We just wanted to dig deeper, and we also wanted to know, to share that we got the wisdom amongst us. So let's get together and understand these systems. So we did this work across 3 cities. Here we focused in Skid Row, which is a really key place to look at the way systems have impacted people's lives. And in Los Angeles, we have an incredible housing crisis. We have so many people who are unhoused, and especially in Skid Row. And so it was really important to do this work here and with the community on the ground who are surviving and resisting these systems. The other city that participated is Detroit, and the 3rd city is Charlotte, North Carolina. And in each of these cities, we had here in Los Angeles, I helped interview 50 people on the ground, majority of folks in Skid Row. And our comrade Tawana Petty in Detroit interviewed folks out there, and Tamika Lewis in Charlotte interviewed folks who in particular had come out from the prison system and wanted to see what were their experiences post-incarceration navigating systems. In Detroit, it was really important to look at the water shutoffs and the way policing was happening across systems and the way it impacted folks. For example, having your water shut off was being used against people to say you're neglecting your child, and this is a reason why we can take your child. So we're seeing brutal cases like this that especially impact Black, trans, and queer, Indigenous, immigrant, most marginalized folks on the ground. So those are the folks we wanted to be in conversation with, who have the experiences of all these systems. So we asked ourselves what are systems, and we started to map that out, and everything from systems of ill ideologies like white supremacy, systems of capitalism were named, systems like school systems, literal buildings, institutions, nonprofit industrial complex, and just a whole lot of systems. So we just started mapping together our knowledge of what systems are. And what we wanted to do is, how are they connected? How are they communicating with each other? How is the police system deep inside all of these systems, is what we were finding. And we find that mostly through our stories, our lived experiences. We wanted to see how are these systems sharing our information with each other? How do they collect it? How do they share it? What do they do with it? And how does this impact our access to human needs? As I was mentioning earlier, all of the folks we were interviewing were folks struggling to secure housing. So how is their interaction with police on the ground impacting their access to having a home, to having a house? How is the interaction that youth are having at school? For example, some of the interviews I found that young folks who got into a fight at school, that was being shared with the housing department at the projects that they live in. And that's one of the ways that that was one of the reasons they were getting evicted. So we needed to map all of this out. And we came up with a lot of popular education-based exercises that we did ourselves. We came up with them, and then we started practicing them in community to better understand these systems. So I just want to offer a 2-minute one for us, just to get a little idea of our work. One of the basic questions we came up with that gave us a lot of understanding of systems is, in your day-to-day, for example, today, what information was collected about you? So if you could just take a minute or two to jot down, and you could put this in the chat box. As you went about your day-to-day, what systems and what information did they collect about you? So just take a moment to think, how does this question land for you? What does it bring up? And what systems collected information about you just today, friends? We'll take a minute for that. And I'll check in, and you could start putting your answers in the chat box. If you want to just give one example or two, feel free.
Can people yell out some of this? So for people who are with interpretation, they may not be able to follow the chat.
Yes, and I can also help read some of these too. Will that work?
And also remembering that some people are speaking Spanish, so if you can put some of your comments up in Spanish, that will help also.
Wonderful. I'm happy to read them in Spanish too. I'm going to read some. He said, I'm assuming Google Zoom now has record of me attending this meeting. Yes. I bought something at CVS this morning, credit card, security camera. I think about social media and how everything you do online feeds back to Facebook, etc. Cat 911 captured name and email address. Trudy, thank you. Kim, internet, groceries, payment. Someone else that I agree that Zoom has my digital footprint. Those are some of them in the chat box. So I don't know if anyone else wants to share another one. Traffic light cameras, Corey. Yes. So thank you so much for sharing that. And it starts becoming overwhelming when we do an exercise like that. Instagram, Facebook, yes. It becomes overwhelming because you start mapping out if everywhere our information is being collected, and a lot of this is normalized. And so our intention in this work is to help notice that this is not supposed to be normalized. And when you look closer on the impact, these are violent systems. Why is this information being collected? In whose hands is it? What do they do with this? And our lived experiences show that these systems are using this information to harm in many cases. So, but the flip side of this, of course, is our resistance, our defense to these systems, and that we ourselves also create infrastructure. We ourselves also create systems, and we need to understand how are all these other systems operating to know how to defend ourselves. For some folks who we interviewed, they were just trying to see how do I stay quote unquote off the grid, and having this analysis was pushing our imagination to see how do we dismantle these systems, how do we survive these systems, how have we already been surviving them, but also to understand like the magnitude of them. Data collection, that they try to make this language super complicated, all this technology and all this talk on data. So we wanted to just bring it down to the ground that we know how this works, we live it, and we've been building our alternatives to them, but we needed to understand them a lot more. So this is what our Data Bodies project looks like, and it resulted in creating a playbook. I'm gonna put that playbook as a gift here in the chat. It is both in English and in Spanish, and it's just a collection of exercises like the one that we just did that help us better understand how data is being collected in our lives, how it's shared, and how we build our defense. So I'm gonna put that in real quick. I just posted the English one. I have to go to the website to get the Spanish one. But the website, friends, is odbproject.org. And under tools, you'll find it both in English and in Spanish. And it's for you to look through, to use, to spread, and to remember that yeah, this is overwhelming when you start studying these systems, but it's an important part of our analysis as we want to abolish and dismantle these systems. We got to know what we're up against, and that we have the wisdom to defend ourselves and to build something better, something different, something not based in harm. There's a lot of stories that I learned through the interviews. I just want to end with one of the things that we learned is a lot of these systems work together to steal our children, to take our children. It was incredible how many interviews from the 50 that I did. A lot of folks have had their children taken through the communication amongst the systems, and also the way communities ourselves position ourselves as police. We start replicating the system and policing each other, and we fall in those traps. So it was really important to name that and to do this kind of work of Cat 911, where we don't play the role of policing each other. We don't point fingers at each other, and then we understand why we've been doing that. Forgive ourselves, move on, and do something different. what else can I want to just end by showing you this also resulted in our stalker state analysis, our visual, so that folks could understand more like what you all named those systems. We started drawing them out. So we're going to share. This is what it looked like, that we couldn't just have, you know, we couldn't just talk about LAPD as a sole entity, but rather LAPD working with Facebook, LAPD, the Department of quote unquote justice, the FBI, DHS, all these, the fusion centers, all these folks, our data bodies project really help inform the part of the stalker state that says public, the DMV, you know, waste management, libraries, schools, all of these different systems have policing in the roots, since they're based on genocide and enslavement. So what we do and we invite you to do is to join us in unpacking these. It's really important that we better understand them. When we think about defunding police and investing into different systems, we have to be very careful and thoughtful about where we're thinking about putting that money, because it might be just going right back to the police. So that's what we want to offer the movement, this analysis. And yeah, always remember that a better world is possible, another world is possible. And right now we're focusing on DCFS. Given this work, we need to expose that system. And October 20th, the third Tuesday of October, we'll launch what we learn more about DCFS, and want to go after that system too. Thanks for your time, everybody. I'm gonna pass it to our comrade Todd here, and look forward to being in community and conversation with y'all and getting free together. Much love to everyone.
Thank you, Mariela. Can you guys hear me? Great.
Talk
So
a bit louder if you can.
okay, sure. So I've been with LACAN for almost 2 years now, and I've had the good fortune of working with Chella and with Mariela and Trudy, all of whom are like amazing warriors that have taught me how to be strong, no doubt. And I had the benefit of, like, here at LACAN, sharing an office with Hamid and Jamie. So it's like, and I'm a researcher by training and by just passion. It's like great to have people like that who are interested in learning more constantly in all kinds of ways. And it's great. It just warms my heart to be around people who really like to take that data and insight and those types of things to a level it's actionable. It's really important. So I'm here to talk about basically what we've done. As I helped to co-lead the Food and Wellness Collaborative here at LACAN, and it's a group of about 25 or so individuals from all kinds of different backgrounds, but who are focused on getting good food in the hands of people who need it the most. And as we know, it's like most of the people that we're focused on are people in Skid Row and South LA, but more importantly, those who are disadvantaged by not having a voice, who feel like they don't have a voice and don't have a platform to be able to fight for what they need. And some people don't even know that they could actually get some of the things that they need. So
I'm so sorry to interrupt, interrupt. Can you talk a little bit slower for the interpreters? And if possible, can you put yourself on your camera? Because they use a lot lip reading and reading your facial expressions to get everything what you're saying.
I'm on the camera. Can you guys see me?
No, I can't see you. Maybe other people can.
Yeah, no, you're on camera.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I'm signed in twice. One is just Todd C, and then one is Todd C LACAN, because I'm going to show my slides on that one. So cool. Sorry about that. And I will slow down. Thank you. Apologies. So why don't we just go into the slide? Just a slide I want to show you. Really quick. So basically, what I wanted to talk about was just what actually we've done here at LACAN, because as in all of the work that we do, it's all about collaboration, and because we know that none of us can do it alone. So back in mid-March, we had to pivot, as many of us have had to do, what it is that we do to address the kind of the significant negative impacts on our community due to the crisis and the pandemic of COVID-19. in particular, the crude reality was that many of the things that were happening were like the usual happenings, but it seemed to happen all at once, and it was in stark display for many people, and in its own weird way, thankfully, it actually got the attention of many people who had ignored it and ignored the kind of things that were happening. And those things were it was really shocking to me being here for the first time and to see these kind of things, that we were abandoned by the healthcare community completely. There was no, I mean, at the time, there was no kind of visible presence of any medical organization. Many of the organizations who were here before had like laid people off. They were retrenching, trying to figure out what they were going to actually do. No organized testing at all, if you remember back then. Our food system in particular was hit very hard, and that whole food system across the entire
Can't hear you, Todd.
We had to shut down across the state. We had to shut all those down. Corner stores were closed. Many of the food donations were vanished from like mom and pops, organizations, churches. People were not only forbidden from doing it legally, but they also were just scared to actually bring food out and to be interacting with people. We just didn't know what was going to happen. So we realized there was a big gap in the kind of food chain for people. There were shameful solutions offered by the mayor to prevent the spread of the virus. Of course, there was, there were in our 50-block radius of Skid Row, there were 6 hand washing stations, none of which had
Sorry, Todd, you can't hear you.
around more than the 6 that we actually had.
Todd, I'm sorry to cut in. You went out for a little while, and you were saying when you went out about in the 60 block area, there was a certain number of hand washing stations. That's when you went out.
Okay.
And if you could talk a little louder too. Thanks.
So in the 50-block radius of Skid Row, the city had only installed 6 hand washing stations, 6 of them, none of which had soap, water, or towels for people. And so it was just a shame. We had done research where we found out that people will not walk more than 2 blocks to wash their hands. They would forgo, even though they knew they needed to wash their hands, they would forgo actually doing it. So we set out on a campaign to actually build do-it-yourself washing stations, which I'll talk about in a second. There was also inconsistent messaging about physical distancing. People didn't know about that. In our community, many of them had not even known that it was a thing. So it was, or that face masks were something useful for them. We had to educate people there. Sheltering in place, of course, was not acknowledged at all by houseless individuals. Like, what does that actually mean? And then many of the social safety net programs came to a halt before they did retrench from the state legislature to be able to give people support. But at the time, they didn't have anything. So our responses were all collaborative. We reached out to partners and allies in healthcare and food and wellness, human rights, to enhance our mutual aid network, which was really terrific. People were almost ready to respond. They not only ready to respond, but in fact, offered the things that we didn't even expect. We created 2 weekly food provision events, which actually one of them just ended today, Sunday Strong and Wellness Wednesdays. We've now given away over 31,000 meals to people in our community, and over 60,000 masks. We're taking the time to actually teach people how to use the masks, how to make sure that they're on correctly before they can get their food. They're also giving them lessons in hand washing, ensuring that they do this, because we believe that if we can educate them around just the routine behavior of actually doing it, becoming habit, that they're not likely to resist when they get into other places and also just in their own self-care. That's been very successful. We developed a lot of fundraising channels to build these hand washing stations, just to put more than 30 across the community. Created culturally relevant. There was just not any culturally relevant reading material or any information around what to do about the virus. So that was a big part of what we what our efforts were here at LACAN. And then we joined many coalitions like this one across the country to address social issues and engaged in new sources of financial support for us. But all that sums up that we actually stayed committed. And one of the things that we did in particular was around our gardens. So we created new experiences to grow our own skills development, to grow skills development within the community. We have 3 new gardens here, 3 different gardens here where we're growing culinary, and in the upper right there you can see our organic rooftop garden where everything is actually organic. We have ethnobotanicals, culinary and medicinal herbs, many of which have gone into food that we give away at our food events on Sundays and Wednesdays. Basically just trying to teach people. We do virtual events where we are teaching people gardening also, what they can do at home, because now with the food system broken down, one of the big trends is for people to grow their own food again. And for people in urban areas, we find that many of them have never been to a garden before or never actually put their hands in soil, and just to be able to see the benefit and joy in that is something really worthwhile. We have a California courtyard garden. It's based all on California native plants, saving water, and just focusing on global warming and really making sure that we're doing our part to educate our community and engage in conversation and practice around these types of things as well. And finally, we have recently focused a lot of our efforts around what's happening with climate change. And so we have 3 aeroponic tower gardens, and we're installing a new water system that basically creates water out of air. So these units actually use 90% less water than in ground gardening. It's kind of a high-tech, low-touch unit that it doesn't require as much effort, as much energy, but it's very fruitful. It's like every 28 days we have new crops that are growing there. And so we're using that to train people, even in these times, around their own skill sets for growing their own food, managing a garden, pricing the kinds of things that they might have if they want to sell them, and working with artists and chefs to be able to give them the kind of things that they actually need to stay afloat, because there's the big produce units are not really focused on them at all. They're not looking for the startups or anything like that. No one's watching out for them. So that's what we've been up to here at LACAN. Hand it back to Hamid.
Thank you, Todd. Do you mind pulling the screen down? Viewing, thanks. So we're gonna hopefully this gave folks a sense of what's been going on, how there's a lot of collective building, collective sharing. And I'm just going to add one quick piece to this as well, that, as we always speak about, that the most impacted should lead. And as we build our communities, I think there's also what are the several ways that folks can participate and lead as well. And one thing that we have done very successfully, at least I would say, is something that we don't really think a lot of times, is basically just basic filing for public records requests. That we have turned into a major sort of a community participatory process, because typically that one piece is seen as a purview of the legal community. So we don't get any lawyers involved. Because the way we approach the public records piece is about storytelling. It's not about a legal case, it's not about discovery, it's about how do we tell the story about state violence, what are the various ways. So I just wanted to share that as a result of it, a lot of folks in Skid Row, a lot of folks actively participate. I mean, of course, as a result of COVID, that has had its own challenges too. But then in a sense, what it does is it helps us unpacking everywhere from what was the thinking of the state and the LAPD behind this program. So for example, anywhere from getting their grant reports to the original, their requests, their letters, their internal workings, their internal emails. How are they developing the process for that? How are they developing the implementation of that? How are they developing the operational of the side of that? So for us, the outreach piece, it comes back to organizing 101, that it's about storytelling. It's not just about a very of a rote way of like, well, this is the program, but what does this program do? And which is very much driven by people's own active participation in bringing these things together. We have successfully won 2 public records lawsuits against the LAPD as well. And lastly, I just want to share that this was a report which was published in 2018, which was an intense collaborative effort of the community, which is called Before the Bullet Hits the Body, Dismantling Predictive Policing in Los Angeles. And this was almost like a 7-8 year campaign or a fight, which finally we were able to dismantle, and all based on a community effort and completely demystifying and desensationalizing these programs as well, and bringing them down to ground level. And we were able to dismantle the whole predictive policing program as a result of that community power. So I'm going to end there, Kim, and see if folks have any questions or any comments or any thoughts, because our goal is to continue building. Our goal is to bring people together and to participate and work with us and keep on building this power.
Thank you so much for the whole LA CAN Stop LAPD spying team. It was totally inspirational. For questions, can you please, if you are able, go on video? It'll help a lot with the interpretation, both Spanish and ASL, and we'll get to answering.
I had a question. Could you go more into depth? Because a lot of this, we're focusing on creating rapid response systems in SoCal. So can you kind of tell us the systems you created kind of in a nuts and bolts way, like how you put them together to create safety in Skid Row, how you did that, what those systems look like a little more, so that we could learn from how we could create them in our own areas?
So maybe just actually, Jamie, do you want to, or Chella, you all want to just talk about?
Yeah, I think in terms of like, number one, learning from a lot of groups that I do shit with, and like I said earlier, like learning from like Audre Lorde and a bunch of other groups about preventative measures, right? Getting to it instead of cutting it when something does happen that's super violent, right? Cutting it off at like even the beginning. Like if my neighbors start fighting, going out and seeing if everyone's okay, right? So thinking around those things, thinking around what is needed in that moment. I'm not gonna say it's 100%, but I do see, I do a lot of that. And just being honest about my own body, I am disabled myself. So I do have to like, think about other people and like including them in these things. I also think in terms of, I think that's it, actually.
Anybody else? I know one thing, just as an immediate response, a rapid response piece to your question, Andy, is that there are codes at LA CAN that we have set up, particularly when the police shows up in the hood. So if it's code orange or if it's code red, then, just immediately folks are out there on the street, and whoever's, it's just a basic, people calling in and saying that this thing is going down. And I think the first thing is to make sure that the community is there. Community is there challenging the LAPD. Community is there to document the actions that are going on as well. And I think it's because of a lot of those efforts, particularly, there have been like challenges to the city, which has shifted access on a very fundamental level, where municipal codes like 4118D were changed as a result, where you couldn't even sit on the sidewalk. You couldn't even just lay on the sidewalk. And as a result of that whole process of community being engaged, and the city continues to fight it, and they've even lost in the Supreme Court now. Now the community can have their tents from 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. Starting at several years ago, but that was very much an effort for the community to come together. So things like that.
Can you say a little more, like how did you create the code red, code orange system and get everyone to be able to respond to the system, like how everyone knows to respond?
Yeah, go.
Also add that to the cop watch system that LA CAN has, so that when people are out in the street, they also intervene with police stops.
Absolutely. And I was going to go to, that's what we call the community watch. So we do community watch, and also on the surveillance front, we do watch the watchers. And this is where on the regular, there are teams and people are coming for regular training. Folks may know General Dogon, who's the lead person over there, who basically grew up in Skid Row as well. Dogon has been doing a lot of trainings and you know, just basically to document police actions, but do it in a very methodical way where people are very much participating, people are documenting. Each time there's community watch going on, there are teams of 2 or 3 people. We continue to offer those trainings as well, making sure that how people are very disciplined, particularly about when they do this cop watch. And I think that, or community watch, and watch the watchers. And that's one of the things that we are seeing increasingly during the uprisings as well, that when people are live streaming and when people are taking photographs, you know, that's one of the biggest issues that can come back to haunt people themselves as well, because we are making people vulnerable by documenting a lot of the community out there into those. So the Community Watch program, and we'd love to maybe one of these days do a detailed training at YJC. I know Anthony had been trying to organize that. And the Watcher piece, where we've even, you know, on May Day, we have outed undercover cops on camera as well. So the methodology is basically just building on baseline cop watch and then taking it to the next level, that it's not only putting a camera on the cops themselves, but also the environment that surrounds it as well, which also means that even going that what are their staging looks like, what is the equipment that they're going to be using, how tactically they're going to be engaging with people, what are their community outreach folks who are going to be coming in, where is the private security that gets in, what is the aerial surveillance by helicopters and now maybe increasingly drones, possibly how that is going on as well. So it's there's a lot to cover in that, and I think so that's what happened. So as a result, these codes were established several years ago as a methodology for an immediate call to action, and that and they were set up as a result that, you know, that in a sense that, okay, cops have showed up, we're in code orange. Now it's moving to the next level. It may be approaching code red. How is the community then coming together and circle all around? And I know that we've had instances, and at one time, you know, I remember Mariella and a bunch of us there, and getting over there, and there were 7 or 8 police cop cars, and how we were able to de-escalate them and to kind of just move them from there as well, because the community came together as a result too. So these are some of the things that are happening. There was another question. I think Sheila had a question saying that how do we fight the surveillance state? Well, Jamie, do you want to address that?
Sure. So right now, I think, how do we fight the surveillance state? That's I think that we all are, in a sense, already, and a lot of the organizing that we are doing against policing is essentially starting that fight. What we're doing in the coalition is a lot of, you know, kind of knowledge building, community building, and building that culture of resistance. I think that that is, you know, the primary goal. And one of the first reasons why I stayed involved in the coalition was because I realized it was a space of not only, you know, wanting an immediate win, and I think an immediate win and wanting to have some kind of push forward against the police state is something that we all want, because I feel like we feel the brutality of it consistently. It's, you know, broadcasted through the news, we feel it in our lives, we see it with our families. But one of the biggest things that the coalition, you know, works on is knowing your fight. And so what that has come down to is building, community-based research teams where we literally use web searches and web browsers, and we are looking up everything we can about different types of surveillance systems. I facilitate right now the data-driven policing working group, where we are, there are times when we partner with academics who have maybe more access to different kind of libraries where they can get, access to academic papers that we can't unless we purchase them. But a lot of our research just comes from web-based research, right? And we file our own public records requests, which allow us to receive documentation from the police departments, again, going through these documents that we do receive on our own, learning more about the systems we want to dismantle. One of the biggest successes that I was able to help facilitate was a fight against predictive policing. And it was a multi-pronged approach where it all began in, the Freedom Room of LA Can. Before it was the Freedom Room, and it was just kind of, LA Can had just moved in, and we were basically reading articles to each other about predictive policing. And from there, we started to build partners with other people that were interested in different components of predictive policing. And we, started to do our own research. And then we moved into doing focus groups and surveys and finding out what the community knew, how they felt about the different types of predictive policing, where there's person-based and place-based. And then we finally filed our first public records request. And so from there, that actually turned into a lawsuit because LAPD thought they could ignore us and not give us documents. And then simultaneously, we were also going to the police commission meetings and advocating and demanding to know more information about that. So we had so many different fronts that we were working on, building culture, building flyers, building graphics, and having our community meetings consistently, that when the wheels started to turn and the pressure started to get pushed against the commission, they couldn't ignore us because we had built so much power. And it really was in the end when we were able to dismantle the chronic offender bulletin database and actually release names of people who were being tracked and traced. They didn't even want to go to court because at this point in time, we had exposed how the program, they were arbitrarily putting people on lists. They were arbitrarily picking homes to evict people through this predictive policing program, that they didn't even want to go to court. They said, forget it. Like, here are the names. We dismantled the system. We're not using it anymore. We dismantled the laser program. So I really think it starts with that knowledge building.
A request for slowing down again.
I'm so sorry. Thank you. I think that it's really about that knowledge building. It's really about the coming together of the community to not only create art and culture, but really that culture of resistance, which we are seeing is changing the landscape right now currently. It's that resistance that we have all built from, from Skid Row to South Central in Los Angeles, that has laid the grounds for so many people right now who are resisting. That's an example of how we went about dismantling the predictive policing programs they were using in Los Angeles.
So last few minutes that we have, Chella or Todd, do you have any comment about that?
I was also thinking, I will be honest and say there's a challenge in some of these, especially because, so like I said, I live in Skid Row. I live in, it's partially government funded, but it's also a nonprofit. I will say when I first moved here, police were allowed to use the balcony to stop and to like arrest people that were selling drugs outside. I will say that hasn't happened in a long time, but that I remember that was like a lot of like my issues with being here. I think it's important for like communities to build a culture, like Hamid named earlier, build a culture around safety, not only from police, but from folks who are perpetrating violence, right? And so like, I think it's, yeah, I just wanted to say that.
Thank you, Chela. And just another quick example I just want to share is about, let me just grab that real quickly, is that we're talking about what Mariela was talking about earlier. This is again when we talk about knowing our fight, and this is a report that we're going to be releasing on October 20th. So join us on our webinar. That we did a Stalker State deep dive into the Department of Children and Family Services to really understand that how information is moving and how it makes our communities vulnerable. And so this is an example like how through various agencies and nonprofits and the academy and law enforcement agencies are points of vulnerabilities that our communities have. These are all reporting databases on top, and they're all described as well in the report, and this is going to be these acronyms over here. And it's really critical, and it was basically building upon time and again of what is happening in people's lives, and especially after a bunch of even recognizing and understanding real lived experiences with these agencies. And as this conversation about defunding is lifting, we want to just kind of throw this caution out there that we don't want to move from one carceral state to another. So in a sense, this is where these are, that when we defund the police and the monies, instead of the cops going into some of these county agencies, can really further move us into a carceral state too. So just wanted to share that.
I wish we had more time because I know there's like tons of questions that people would ask. But can everybody, again, I've known LA CAN for a long time. I'm sure a lot of people have, as well as Stop LAPD Spying, known them, and other people probably have. But we don't get to have a lot of opportunities where we really go inside people's brains and hear the details of their work. So I really, on behalf of myself and Cat 911, I want to appreciate all you brought today, the huge team you brought out on a Sunday afternoon. Can everybody, again, please get off your mute buttons and make as much noise as possible for Stop LAPD Spying and LA CAN.
Yay!
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're really honored. Thank you very much. Much appreciated.
Thank you so much, Stella, Todd, Mariela, Hamed, Jamie. Really, really appreciate you. Everybody that's on the call, we're going to stay on now. If you want to debrief, everyone's welcome to go home, have a great dinner, do something fun for yourself. But if you want to debrief the conversation, talk about how to apply this to your own CAT teams, we use this time afterwards to debrief, or that's a bad word because that's a cop word, but to discuss. And again, thank you all so much for everybody who came out. Get home safe, or get to your kitchen safe. Thank you. And we'll start the discussion, if people want to stay on, in 2 minutes.
Kim?
Yes.
I have to go, so I'm going to make you the host, okay?
For sure. And I'll dedicate a song to everybody while we're waiting, just for people to take a break.
We know hands full at home.
I'm building a space.
So Instacart.
Sorry for that abrupt, can't stop with the music. So how the, go ahead.
Kim,
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt. Can I ask two things? One, Can people please put in the chat their language preference? We're trying to figure out if we want Jen to stay with us to continue interpreting. So if you could please put in the chat what languages you feel comfortable speaking and understanding. And then while we're doing that, Kim, do you want to stop the recording or should we keep recording this part?
Maybe stop it just so people can feel, yeah.
I think now that you're the host, I think you have the
Okay.
power, don't you? Or maybe, oh, maybe I can stop it too.
I can stop it there, I did.